Hey team, it's Tom from FitCure. Welcome back on our carbohydrate habit, and today we are talking all about grains. So grains, let's talk about some buzzwords with regards to grains. So we've got things like sprouted, whole wheat, 100% whole wheat, rye, multigrain, gluten-free. It all sounds super healthy, but what the hell does that actually mean? Well, let's have a look. So a sprouted grain, let's start at the top. So sprouted grains are essentially dry whole grains that have basically been rinsed and then leave them to sit and grow for a few days, hence the name sprouted grains, yeah? So things like quinoa, wheat berries, things like that. So why would you do that? Why would you have sprouted grains? What's the secret to a sprouted grain? Well, essentially it's healthier to a certain extent. Sprouting grains increases vitamin and mineral content of the grain. It's easier for the body to digest. And it gets rid of these what we call anti-nutrients. And anti-nutrients essentially block the absorption of certain minerals. So it actually reduces the amount of anti-nutrients that is within the grain. So sprouted grains are pretty cool. And sprouted grains create more protein and fewer starches. So it's all good reasons to have some sprouted grains within your diet. So next one we looked at is whole wheat, whole grain. So I found this one interesting when I did my little research on this one. So you've got to watch the food packaging. So in as of May 2013, there's an American study which essentially said you can put whole wheat and whole grain on the packaging, providing it's got 8 grams or more per 30 grand product. Scandalous is what that is essentially. So that means that all you need is 1/3 of the good stuff, the whole grain in there, and you can start touting that you're a whole grain product, shockingly so. So we've definitely got to read our labels, because potentially 2/3 of that have low nutrient, low quality bleaching agents and white flour. So it could have some right Carruthers in there and only have a little minuscule amount of what you actually want. So read your labels, check the labels, make sure it says 100% whole grain or 100% whole wheat. And your ingredients that you're allowed on the back are 100% whole wheat flour, salt, yeast. So any ingredients that when you're reading the back of these things, it looks like you need a PhD to be able to actually read what they say. And then obviously that is bad ingredient. No good for us. So we don't want to be eating anything like that. So super important that we read your labels with regards to the whole wheat, whole grain. Multigrains. So multigrains are essentially a couple of different grains, 3, 4, whatever, that are all bundled together to make a multigrain product. The same rules apply for this one as well. So the same rules apply. Obviously, you need to check your packages, make sure that it makes up 100% of the product. And exactly the same, again, 8 grams or more to call it a multigrain. Shocking. And again, ingredients-wise, you want to see, obviously, 100% whole grain or whatever, and then salt and yeast, no PhD ingredients. So moving on, so we've got the ancient grain. So great marketing strategy, the ancient grain, 200-year-old grain. So if someone was eating it 200 years ago, it must be good for me. That's what I'm thinking straight away. Depends, really. We're going to look now. So there's no strict definition for essentially what an ancient grain is as such. So I can call something an ancient grain, but there's not a strict definition for all that. But it's grains that have been eaten for hundreds of years and remain relatively unchanged. Things like teff, millet, quinoa, amaranth, farro, spelt, typically less processed, and typically they are better for you, obviously, they're way better for you than processed foods that have been refined, like refined flour and packaged carbohydrates. So they are technically better than you, but they're not magical. You know, you're not going to eat an ancient grain and it's going to change your life and you walk out with a 6-pack. If you are curious about ancient grains and want to try some different textures and flavours, awesome, crack on, get some quinoa, put some bouillon through it. You know, there's loads of exciting recipes out there, and it keeps things varied. But it's not going to change your life if you eat an ancient grain. But it's a great marketing strategy. So where are we? Yeah. So lastly, gluten-free. So gluten-free, what does that mean? So gluten-free essentially means there's no wheat, barley or rye within the product. That is where it ends, basically. So it's got no wheat, barley and rye. Whilst there's loads of really healthy gluten-free products out there, there is also the gluten-free products that are essentially full of refined flour, sugar, trans fats, all sorts of other Carruthers that can be in there. Just because it says gluten-free on it doesn't actually mean it is in any way good for you. It could be rat poison, could be gluten-free. Obviously not quite that extreme, but to argue my point a little bit. So as always, read the labels and try and eat whole, unprocessed foods where possible. Look for those 100% whole grains. Look for your quinoas, your rices. Try and find it in its most natural source. If it's coming in a packet, if your rice is coming in a packet, and you guys know that I've got some of that at home as well for an emergency, it's not as good as getting some dried rice or some wild rice and essentially rinsing it off and cooking it yourself. But it's just understanding where you're at, where you need convenience sometimes with regards to when and where you can't eat certain things, but where possible, where you can take control, try and eat whole, unprocessed foods. I'll see you guys tomorrow for another lesson.